So, thank you for joining. I want to do a deep dive, as usual, into this topic and expose what I call the fake Black conscious movement. Sasha, welcome, Council. We have on stage with us a friend of mine, attorney at law out of the UK. So happy to have you join us this evening, Sasha. How are you doing?
Thank you, sis. I'm okay. I'm all right. I kind of forgot, so I do apologize. I'm glad that you sent me the reminder, but I'm here and I'm still awake. So I didn't even have a chance to write any notes, so I am going to be winging it. But let's see what we can come up with.
Well, we know you are more than competent and capable. And, we have in our private discussions kind of scratched the surface on some of the issues we'll be discussing tonight. So I look forward to all your contributions.
Thank you.
Brother Leighton, thanks for joining again. Happy to have you as usual. I want to dive straight in. When I say I'm pro black, is it my way of acknowledging that other black people are anti black? What does the concept pro black really mean? Sasha, you wanted to go first?
Hmm. I don't know if I have an opposing view on this particular topic. So I will allow somebody else to speak and then I'll make a contribution.
Okay. Leighton?
Yes, Kish,
Hey.
can you hear me?
Yes, hearing you loud and
Yeah,
clear.
what a fantastic opening.
Thank you.
Anytime I hear people say pro-black, I get a little queasy because it usually is in an attempt to, they usually say pro-black, I find, in counter opposition to describing themselves as Pan-African, in some kind of weird way to distinguish their blackness from their Africanness. And I think it finds most expression in those pro-blacks who want to identify their blackness outside of the transatlantic slave trade. So they stress on the blacks that were here before Columbus, however they came to be here, and so it's their their black identity is somehow divorced from those Africans who came over here and came to this part of the world um, as part of the slave trade. Um, Also, it allows them to be pro or in support of a group of people without necessarily ascribing to that people's cultural uh, heritage or background. So I can be pro-black while still denigrating or looking down on the African contribution to language in this part of the hemisphere, or whatever African retentions there may be. I don't recognize them as African, but I still hold up myself as being pro-black. And I think the pro-blackness of these people is loudly um, most loudly proclaimed when they are in service of white supremacy. and are boasting about how wonderful and how useful, how excellent they are in service of white supremacy. So people like Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, people who have been instrumental in soldiers, foot soldiers in the army of white supremacy, that we celebrate those persons and celebrate our pro-blackness um, in terms of giving kudos to these people who have distinguished themselves in the service of white supremacy. So, what pro blackness has come to mean is something completely different from black liberation. It has meant come to mean um, recognition that black people can do as well as white people in the system of white supremacy if only we would apply our black talents to to um, to learning and exemplifying white norms and philosophies and ideals.
Thank you, Leighton. That's interesting. I would have thought the concept of pro black, in the sense that you first described, would be more related to people who are pro nationalism. So, you have the Jamaicanists and the Ethiopianists who are not black, but they identify with their ethnicity first, etc. But very, very interesting. Sasha, you ready to share your opposing view with us?
Yeah, sure. I'm still kind of tussling with Leighton's ideas surrounding pro-black, because if you just mentioned the word pro-black, what that initially says to me is 1960s Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X, because that is when the term essentially kind of like gained this momentum. Um, so as soon as I hear that word, that's what I associate it with. Um, I struggle with the term, and that's why I say my views are opposing views, because I do not like the term black. I understand that this may be a personal thing, and it's not because I believe that black is derogatory, although it has been used in a derogatory manner, and many may have opposed it based on that definition of blackness that has been consistently fed to us, particularly by white American white supremacists. But I am, what's the word, divesting from blackness. So that's why I say my views are opposing. I have various reasons for being the way that I am and thinking the way that I am now, because I have been, part of many of these movements throughout the years, particularly in my 20s. I was part of the Nation of Islam, then ultimately became a Sunni Muslim, but I still moved in those circles, so to speak. And I had a older lady friend who was part of that pro-black movement, which is the Nation of Islam, and her experience there was just nothing short of just it was depressing to see and to view, because they have many issues, internal issues, such as colorism or shadism, whichever way you'd like to phrase it. So those things exist within the Nation of Islam, and I have my own kind of like gripe with them from the death, or should I say the murder of Malcolm X, and what I see as the same things we see in our islands in the Caribbean, the crab in a barrel syndrome. It's more about power, individual power, which goes back to what you were saying initially. Um, those were the thoughts that I had with your opening statement. Is that the reason why I feel the way that I feel about, these sorts of, and I would say it's not just the women, but I have seen majority of this behaviors come from the men. Ego. And so we find the ego in a negative way infiltrating these organizations, these groups, etc. And then it becomes the I. It doesn't. It's not about the group, so to speak. So we can elaborate on that as time goes on, and I will, answer or engage as you speak further.
Thank you, Sasha. It's interesting that you said that your views are opposing when so much of what you just said, I agree with you 1,000%. You know, Leighton, I often reflect on the need to declare yourself something. What does that mean? If I am a free person and I truly believe myself to be free, why do I have to constantly go around and declare that I am free? It's kind of like the old saying from Shakespeare. Forgive me for the example, but it's what's coming to mind now. The lady doth protest too much. And what we find, similar to what Sasha says, in the so called Black conscious movement, the Black conscious communities, it's this over exaggerated identity, if you will, of I am Black, I am free, I am powerful, I love myself, I'm dignified. When you just look just beneath the surface, you don't even have to dig deep. You find colorism, you find uh, anti-womanism, you find oppression even within the ranks, you find betrayal, you find individualism, as Sasha says. Can you share your thoughts on that aspect of it, Leighton?
Yes, indeed, Keisha. Um, I have come to a very jaundiced view of the Black conscious community by virtue of their it's really a cosplaying of Black identity as some sort of, I don't know, sanctuary, um, some sort of psychic salve, you know. We were kings once, and we were this, and we were that, and we are the original whatever. And it's like um, shows and symbols and nothing substantive to nothing substantive really. Um, we're not um, be, being self-deterministic. That is the crux of it. We're not being self-deterministic. Um, last week's episode dealing with Winnie Mandela, where we were speaking about Julius Malema's political formation, the economic freedom fighters. You see in that formation a tangible effort to address the material needs of Black people. And these material, Black people of South Africa, and these material needs um, are, in addressing them, you'd be forced to look at the the means of production, the economic relations, or how much land black people provide, um how much land black people own, how many industries that are key to their survival or thriving that they control. And these hard questions of how we organize ourselves to, as Marcus Garvey would say, take our place, sit at the table of other nationalities on an equal footing, that until we wrestle with the concept of doing for ourselves, redefining things for ourselves, and organizing ourselves in the best way possible for us according to our worldview, that none of these things can happen if we are not um, intrinsically, if we don't have any intrinsic self worth. And what has happened is that those among us who have led this charge of blackness have really had no intention of bringing the mass of people along, but really have set themselves up as a sort of go between of white supremacy, where they just play a kind of intermediary role and take whatever benefits white supremacy is handing down and cream off those benefits and trickle down the rest of them to the rest of the black population until the rest of the black population say next time, next time, next time. Which is why Malema keeps on stressing economic freedom within our lifetimes.
But a follow up question for you, Leighton. Sasha raised a very provocative point about the use of the word black. And I find it interesting because it seems that every time we're defining ourselves, even within struggle, we're defining ourselves using words and descriptions by the very thing that we want emancipation from. So we know Ethiopia was a Greek word, is a Greek word. We know even people say, oh, don't say South Africa, say Azania, or they'll say Al Kabelan. Al Kabelan is an Arab word, you know, and the concept of black too is something that was forged in many ways out of the experience of slavery. Of course, we can talk about the history of the use of the word chem in Kemet, etc. But I think it's a valid point that definition does matter. But would you say that the use of the term black is still relevant, or does it have a more negative meaning now?
Um, this is such an interesting question. I like black. I love black, and I think that it is natural to define yourself in opposition to your enemy. I am concerned that the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was once that, so this is Garvey's formation, that was once a source of such pride. In latter day times, the word Negro has come to be considered derogatory, and I I now notice the move to make black the term somehow derogatory as well. And I see people pushing for the term melanated. And I predict that in some 20 years, there will also be a problem with melanated. So I think whatever word is used to describe people of darker hue will eventually come to be regarded as a derogatory term simply because black people themselves see their color as derogatory. And so much of the paeans to black pride and black royalty and so forth is really coming from a place of deep inferiority and wanting to proclaim and affirm pride in an identity that is deeply not felt.
Sasha, can you respond and just expound upon why you say black may not necessarily be
Yeah.
an ideal term?
Yeah. Well, okay. I'll put it this way. I watched a video recently where there was a young man who was dating a quote black woman, right? But when he described himself as Asian. Okay. Now, from my perspective, looking at him, he did it maybe for the sake of safety because he's using the internet. He decided not to say, specifically what country he's from. Who knows? He could have said, oh, he's Chinese because he has an Oriental, for the lack of a better word, face, right? Everybody can see that. Um, but he described himself using a geographical location, and when he was describing his wife, he said that she was black. I find that problematic. If you consider the fact that everybody else in the world, other than black people and white people, and we'll get to that in a minute, always refer to themselves by their nationality or their geographical location, to be specific, as this young man did in his short video on YouTube. That's one of the reasons why I have a problem with it. Another
In
reason
other
why,
words, there's no such thing as as no country called black.
exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. The other reason why I have a problem with it is because when and this is where people find me problematic, because I would rather use the term Creole than use the term black, right? But I'm saying that specifically because that is an identity, a specific identity that was formulated out of slavery, and it is an admixture of all the people that populated the Caribbean. Out of that came a culture. So I think culture is a very important thing. Our situation as Caribbean people, I would even prefer the term Caribbean, by the way. If someone asked me where you're from, what's your ancestry or your lineage, I would love that. Just say Caribbean. I'm happy with that, right? Because that's a geographical location. That's fine. You'll get it. I'm from the Caribbean. Great. When I was in school, which is going to be interesting to someone who's had the experience that I have had, being that I've resided in the Caribbean as a child from the age of 6 to 15 in St. Lucia and Jamaica, respectively, but was born in this country, right? So my identity is all messed up. Right, because number one, I am a British citizen. Number two, I can consider myself English because I was born here, my mother was born here too, right? In saying that, when I was in school, we have the Nigerians, maybe some people from Uganda, but I would say the most dominant were the Ghanaians and the Africans. Now, bear in mind, even then, you have the different ethnic groups within Ghana, you have the different ethnic groups within Nigeria. So I'm using those two terms loosely. and I'm not using it in an ignorant manner, because I know that they won't just refer to themselves as Nigerian if they were in Nigeria. So I just wanted to make that clear. They used to call us slave babies when we were in school as Caribbean people. And then the Caribbean in turn used to use derogatory terms like boo boo when arguing with someone who was from Africa. There was a boy in my class, for example, Jeffrey. He used to get picked upon, he did kind of like have some BO, but people used to pick on him, and that was kind of like one of the ignorant things that Caribbean people, descendants of Caribbean people, used to think about African people, is that they weren't clean and their food stunk, things like that. So when we're saying black, we have to consider these things. Number one, we are not African anymore, and we haven't been for a very long time. We cannot identify with Africa. And within that, when we go back and we repatriate, we can see that a lot of people, for example, particularly black women, because they don't have any man who's supporting them, right? When they move over there to these countries, they are being exploited and they are being murdered. We are not African. And I know the way it sounds, but it's a fact that that is not who we are anymore. And I want to know when we're going to come to terms with that. We are what we are. We created something else. We have our own culture, and that's what we should be focused on. African Americans are the ones, I would say, that are responsible for the word black. I do not claim it. And I purposely on application forms will not put down black. If anything, I'll just say I'm British and leave it at that. Because in fact, there's no need for you to even know what it is that I look like. What you need to know is that I have the qualifications and the experience, and that I'm competent. Which brings me to another point. At which point do we have enough knowledge not to consistently lead with blackness as an identity? I feel that the term black itself is being used as a master way of segregating us. And that's just a few of the reasons why I do not like that term.
Thanks, Sasha. I it's, what you said is interesting about the Caribbean, because Indians in the Caribbean still refer to themselves as Indian, Chinese also. Um, and many of them, they never been to China. They don't speak any Chinese languages, but they still consider themselves Chinese, or certainly a variation of Chinese. So whether they're Chinese Jamaican, Chinese Guyanese. So I'm not sure why black people ought not to refer to themselves as African Jamaican. But Leighton, the concept of Creole, being Creole, or saying I'm from the Caribbean, or some people will say I am indigenous, I'm not black. Sometimes it sounds to me like a form of Otamenism. So, I mean, of course, Sasha, you're open to respond afterwards, but I'm just curious, Leighton, what are your thoughts on that? Because in a way, it does sound as though I really don't want to be identified as black. I am this other thing that contains other races, outer many in Jamaica, or indigenous in amongst black people in America. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I am against it. I think that I think that it's a way of it's a form of assimilation. So you say, I remember doing a post on my Facebook page once, mooting the establishment of an African Jamaican party. I said, if 90% of Jamaicans are African descended, and we have an African Jamaican party that is based on that, then automatically we have a great numerical advantage. And the response to that was overwhelmingly negative. Nobody wanted to be identified with an African Jamaican party. And the point was made by some of the commenters that we don't identify ourselves as African Jamaicans, we are just Jamaicans. And I found that funny based on exactly the point that you made earlier. Whenever we're celebrating Chinese cuisine, uh, or Chinese, any contribution that the Chinese or Lebanese or Indians have made to our culture, culinary culture, dance culture, whatever. It's Indo-Jamaican, Chinese Jamaican, Lebanese Jamaican. We have no problem in identifying the ethnicity or background of that particular ingredient of the melting pot. But the base of the melting pot is never identified. It's just subsumed into Jamaicanness, you know? So, and in a funny way, that means that when you speak of a Jamaican getting busted at the airport or being the victim in love triangle killing or whatever, the image of Jamaica, that Jamaican is black. But if a Jamaican wins a medal in an equestrian event, and somebody says, "Oh, I didn't know they had a white person in Jamaica." Oh, yes, out of many one people. And so our Jamaicanness is used to hug up and draw in every other ethnicity that can lay claim to its origin beyond Jamaica. But we're just stuck at saying, "Oh well, we are Jamaican." Um, so I and what I really wish to say in response to Sasha is that when I first read Marcus Garvey and he spoke of the black problem, what he identified was everywhere on earth, the darkest, the people of the darkest hue are at the bottom of the society. Like, let's forget about nationalities and so forth. Everywhere on earth that he had visited, the darkest shade of people were at the bottom of the society. At that point, it becomes semantic and really futile to discuss the problem as anything other than a black problem. Also, where it comes on to ethnicities, the Italians will discriminate against the Irish, and both of them will discriminate against the Poles. And so you have all kind of internecine warfare amongst various white tribes. But one thing all white tribes agree on is that they must be in primacy to all black tribes. So there is a standard of whiteness that they use that if you don't counterpose with blackness, then you are doomed, you are lost. The all of the white nations that ganged up against Haiti when Haiti beat France, these nations were enemies of France. but not when it came to the Haitians against the French. So it to me it's almost suicidal for black nations to say, "Oh, we're not black, we're Brazilian, we're not black, we're Jamaican," when in each of those nations, the people who have it worst, socioeconomically, politically, any kind of other alley, is the blackest shaded of the people.
You know, South America has often been described as the forgotten continent for the simple fact that so many of its African population is not identified as black. And so they get marginalized even worse than other countries that are identified as black countries because they're almost invisible. No one thinks about the black people in Iran. People hardly think about the black people in Mexico, etc., because there's this overarching idea that you are just Hispanic. So that's very interesting. Sasha, I know from my travels that, for example, Leighton spoke of Italians. Italians in Italy will tell you that they're not like Italians in New York. They make a distinction. They see themselves as superior, and sometimes even vice versa. Chinese, when I went to Beijing, they distanced themselves from the Chinese in New York. you know so I think, and I'm asking you, isn't there enough space for a continent that's so diverse like Africa for people to understand, accept, and embrace? Okay, I am not the same as a person who was born and raised in Lagos, because I was born and raised in Jamaica, but I'm still African. I am African Jamaican. Just like the Italian American is different from the Italian in Italy. Isn't that something, a reality that we can exist with comfortably?
Yeah, of course we could, but the reality is not everybody's got common sense. We can scream to the cows come home that we are African. It doesn't make any difference. And so our discourse has to be rooted in the reality of our very unique situation. When and I will say, just with regards to the term Creole, this is a very personal thing. I'm not saying that everybody in Jamaica should adopt this. This is definitely a personal thing, and we've maybe had a few conversations about it. And mine is unique in that Creole is an identity, which is encompasses language, culture, aspects of culture such as cuisine, national dress, and things of that nature. So it's a personal thing to me. It's not something that I think that everybody in Jamaica should engage in. And contrary to popular belief, not all of us are mixed. Some of us did get away with not being raped by white people. So it's a very unique stance. But I just want to stress that when someone is claiming
I'm
their
sorry to interrupt you, Sasha, but before you go on, I wasn't using my use of the word Creole is in the same way as indigenous, um, all those terms, Indian, what's the other one, Maroon, Arawak, whatever, Taino. I'm saying whatever term that is used, if whatever is personal to any one of us, I was saying, is it similar to the out of many term? However you want to
uh,
call it, identify yourself.
okay, no, I don't think it's the same of out of many. I think that many Jamaicans who are colorists use the out of many as a scapegoat and an excuse to dilute their blackness, air quote. So I think they're two very distinct things. I think the out of many is to basically again incorporate whiteness and Indianness and everybody else ness into the melting pot when the majority of people in Jamaica are Black people, right? So I think they're two different things, and that's another point that I just wanted to touch on. And I can see how it can be perceived as otherism. Oh, I'm not Black. It's not a dislike for myself as the African diaspora, but it's just firmly rooted in the reality that we are an other. And so our as I mentioned, our position is extremely unique. And just to also go back to the point that I made, that the term Blackness itself is being used to pigeonhole us, you know. So I think that's a very important aspect of why I detest it. For instance, we have this term here in the United Kingdom, what we use, I don't know if they're using it anywhere else in the world, called BAME, Black and Ethnic Minority Groups. Now, for you to just like put us in this melting pot, homogenous melting pot of Black and minority, we all have different needs. You know, it's like when people who are homosexual like to say, oh, I'm, you know, I suffer whatever too, and you know, kind of related to Blackness. That's what it gives. It reminds me of that, and I really detest that, you know. So there, I don't know, I understand what he was saying in terms of you know, in terms of basically the beef that we have with white people for the longest amount of time, right? We have to have some kind of all encompassing word that unifies us, and I understand why we use it. I still have to use it for the sake of simplicity, but because we're having a debate, I'm saying why I think we should divest from its use and maybe use something else, because to me it literally isolates us, where they do not pay any attention to our unique culture that we literally built from
Who
our
is
blood.
they though? Who is they not paying attention to our
They,
unique cultures?
oh,
But why
just
do we need
just
them to pay attention? Why do we need them to pay attention to our cultures? Because and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds as though a big part of the gripe with the word black is because of how others see the term black, not black
no.
in itself.
No, it's not how others perceive the word Black. I think I did mention that it's not about the perception of the term, because if we really look at the etymology of the word Black itself, it's not actually derogatory. It evolved into being derogatory. So it's not necessarily about what other people feel about the word Black itself. But I'm saying, when if we actually consider how other people refer to themselves, we are the only ones that are being called Black. Africans are not calling themselves Black. They may do like on a YouTube video or whatever, but they're not saying that. They're specifically saying I am Igbo, or I am Yoruba, or I am. Do you see what I'm saying? We're the only ones that are doing that. And within that, what is it actually doing? Because the actual conversation is the fake Black conscious community, right? So this idea that we all fall under this umbrella of Blackness obviously isn't doing any justice, because the conscious community is a has been. It doesn't exist, so it's useless.
I think context matters. Black Africans do use the term black in their movements historically, and they do use it now to differentiate themselves, especially in places like South Africa where there are other groups of others, or when they come to European countries, they do use the term black. And I think, I want to move on from this point, but I just want to say, I think context is everything. And if I'm talking about the cultural differences between certain people in America, in the Americas, sure, the word black wouldn't be sufficient because some of us are Jamaicans and some of us are Cubans. So and same for on the continent. Some people are Igbo, some people are Fulani. but there is a context within which that, the word black should, can, and must be used, I would think. But going back to the fake black conscious community,